Welcome to another episode of Systematic Geekology. This is a space where we seek to create and cultivate healthy conversations between those things we geek out on and the philosophical and theological questions that often arise out of our fandoms. Like, what does it mean to be human? What makes a hero? What makes a villain? How do the stories and narratives we geek out on shape how we live in the world? We are your priest to the geeks. We aren't all ordained, but we see ourselves as mediators at the intersection of geek culture and going deeper in our faith. We don't always have to agree, but we do respect each other, and we see everyone as a beloved child of God. Everyone geeks out on something, so come geek out with us and enjoy the show.
You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
This is Systematic Geekology. We are the priest to the geeks. And this is our What's News episode for December 2024. So thank you everyone for joining us. I am Kevin Schaeffer, and joining me today is one of my great co-hosts here, Christian Ashley. Christian, how are you today?
Man, I'm all right. It is so good to not be in seminary right now.
I was just about to ask. Yeah.
I am back home, and I have nothing to do, and that's amazing.
You get like a month off now?
Yep. I'll be back in mid-January.
Fantastic. That is, enjoy every minute. We are definitely going to the Alamo at some point during your break because we've got Nosferatu coming up.
We are.
Oh, several other movies, but I cannot wait for you to experience it. So, yeah.
Yes. I'm so looking forward to that.
Oh, it'll be great. Well, Christian, speaking of that, what are you geeking out on other than being done with school?
So for like the lightning round stuff here, I am going through Ultraman Arc right now, which is being released weekly. They've got the official Super Riot channel. They've also got the dub channel too, which is what I'm listening to because I listen, to English a little better than other languages. I am it's not the best in the world, but it's fun. Other than that, the Dan season that's going on right now has been amazing. I think actually we're going to be covering that in a couple of months if I looked at the schedule correctly. Then Dragon Ball Daima continues to be going well. But yeah, how about you, Kevin?
I've been geeking out on a lot of movies around this time of year, especially both holiday favorites and then new ones, which we'll, of course, talk about in a little bit. I'll save those. But I did watch the other day with a friend the new Watchmen animated movie. We watched part one the other night, which I was like, when I first saw that, I was like, do we really need that? Like, I feel, it's like they've done, of course, the Snyder movie, and then they did like the motion comic, and there's been a decent amount of Watchmen content in years. And when they announced that as like the next big animated project, I was skeptical for two reasons. A, because I just wasn't sure if I like needed that story told again, and B, just because a lot of the recent DC animated projects have been more disappointing. But I am pleased to say this one was very good. It's from the director of Batman Under the Red Hood and Young Justice, Brandon Vietti, and then J. Michael Straczynski wrote the script. So it's a very faithful adaptation. We just watched part one the other night. Part two is available to buy, but once it comes to Max, we'll watch that one. But I like the animation a lot. Again, it's a very faithful adaptation. It's good voice acting. So I highly recommend that. And then beyond that, I got some 4K movies on Black Friday. So not anything really connected. I just kind of looked at what were the best deals. So I look over here. I've got Matrix Resurrections, The Goonies, Casablanca, Training Day, The Green Mile. And then I also got at the Criterion Collection sale at Barnes & Noble on Friday, not the Al Pacino Scarface, but the 1930s one, which I've never seen. So kind of a random collection, but I love just stocking up on a 4K Criterion Collection stuff around this time.
Excellent. I should also mention, I believe as of this recording, Skeleton Crew releases tonight. So I'm going to watch that.
Is it tonight? Okay, yeah, that is. Okay, that is coming. Yeah, that's exciting. Yeah. It looks a lot of fun. Very cool. Awesome. Well, I am very excited for this episode. So we've got three main topics we're going to talk about. The first is the Penguin series on Max. we'll also get later on to Gladiator II and Wicked. So we are going to be pretty diving into spoilers with all of these. So fair warning. That's why we want to do the Penguin now. It's been a few weeks since the finale. So hopefully you've all seen it. If not, maybe come back and listen to this later because I do really want to talk quite in depth about this series. So first off, Christian, what were your thoughts going into this series and just your opinion of Matt Reeves' The Batman?
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't say I'd be hesitant about this series, but I was kind of like, if it fails, it fails.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, because the Matt Reeves Batman film, I really did enjoy his take on Bruce and him like becoming his own, superhero for the first time in the film in a way where, it wasn't retreading a lot of the stuff of, goodness gracious, why can I not think of names? Burton and Nolan.
Yeah.
Doing his own thing, but also keeping the core parts of who Batman is as a character. I did enjoy that film. And I enjoyed Farrell as, the Penguin in the movie. So I was like, okay, sure. If it's good, it's good. If it's bad, well, I lose nothing. And I gained a lot. I love this show. So I'm so ready to talk about that more. But how about you first before we head that way?
Very similar thoughts. I find really the whole history of Matt Reeves' Batman really fascinating because, it happened because the Ben Affleck movie fell through and then Matt Reeves was brought on, but he didn't want to continue in the Snyderverse. He wanted to do his own thing. So he went and made, a homage to Year One, Long Halloween, Batman the Animated Series. And I love the movie. I know there are mixed reactions to it. Some like that it's a very gritty, grounded Batman version. Others wanted kind of a blend of the fantastical and to take place in the larger DC universe. But I really liked that movie a lot and what it did for the character and definitely for the villains. I mean, I loved Riddler. I loved Penguin. And I was definitely excited to see more. Similar to you, I didn't if I was going to the show, I was like, if it's not good, I don't really care that much. It's not I don't think it's this is kind of its own thing. If it's good, that's great. And same, I was very pleased that, I loved this show. So let's just get into it. I guess first off, okay, so it's a series, 8 episodes. It does take, one of the things I thought was interesting to me is when they first announced it, I thought it was going to be a prequel because when they said it was going to not have Batman in it and all that, it was just going to be about how does, Oz becomes the Penguin, becomes his crime lord. And then when they said oh no, it takes place directly in the aftermath of the Batman, but Batman's not in it. I thought that was an interesting approach. And yet it works so well. So what were your thoughts on that? Just the overall direction of the series and its connection to the movie.
Yeah, that was a good idea in that, we're following the repercussions of the Riddler, flooding the poorer sections of Gotham and the people being affected by that. We might have gotten something in the next film, and I'm sure we will, but it wouldn't have been the deeper dive that we got in the show of just how it has wrecked, Gotham in this way. And in fact, it's Batman doesn't appear in the show, spoilers, physically because he's dealing with the repercussions of what has happened with the Riddler. So he doesn't have time to deal with the gang war in the midst of everything else that's going on here. So he's focusing more on saving lives while, they're focusing on, fighting each other. So that makes perfect sense for me. And because the reasons they don't want to pay patents and, money or anything like that. But this is a good way to do that without me feeling, okay, he should be here right now. No, Batman's doing other stuff just off screen. So, yeah, I think they got the feel of the film really well. I think the general premise just works really well. We've got some great stellar characters here. We'll get to that in a moment. I really fell in love with this series as I kept watching it.
It really does just get better and better. And, it starts off, you think it's going to be one of those shows, which I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but a lot of the kind of villain origin or villain perspective movies and shows in recent years, I'm thinking the Disney stuff like Maleficent and Cruella, they make you kind of root for those characters more by changing the perspective. I watched Cruella, I'm I like her more now. She does some horrible things later on, but also I'm you understand her arc here. So in a lot of these approaches, it's okay, how do we make the audience empathize for someone who is more of an antagonist? What I really thought was interesting about this show is that it starts off that way, but by the end, any sympathy you had for Oz is way out the window, at least in my opinion, because they make you just realize just, oh, he has so much inherent evil from the time he's a kid. And I thought that was a fascinating approach because, like, you're already about midway through the series more conflicted. You're like, do you really want this guy to win? Or, I mean, I'm fascinated watching him and I'm fascinated by Colin Farrell's performance, but it's like, I'm rooting more for Sophia at this point, or I'm rooting more for, and then again, by the end, it's like, holy cow, this guy is just evil. And it was fascinating that I could watch that through and through and that wasn't a turnoff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely and utterly agree, because normally in a show like that, it's like there's no redeemable aspects of that character, then I kind of tune out. But what I'm really grateful for here is they didn't go with the whole, he's actually really a good guy. He's just having to do bad things like this. It's like, no, I'm tired. I've said it many times before in the show. I hate Breaking Bad. I hate stuff like that, where you try and convince me that the guy who is obviously doing very evil things is actually just a good guy at heart. And he's just, the system is what's broken. Yeah, sure, the system's broken, but he's taking advantage of a broken system too. Like Oswald Cobb, and I know it should be Cobblepot, but that's what I decided to do for the series, is a monster through and through. He is hateful. He is spiteful. He is someone you would never look up to, and yet he's competent. He's able to make plans around plans. Oh, that plan failed. Well, I got to figure something else out. He deals with his employees well at the very beginning until he starts realizing, oh, well, maybe that's a weakness. And we get what happens to poor Vic at the end there. And then you go, oh, he's absolutely a monster. What he does to Sophia is even more horrific, forcing her to undergo even more mental turmoil after she's already suffered immense mental turmoil, and she's not exactly a rose herself. But yeah, I love what they do with him in this show. He is a monster, and when we talked about spoilers, when that bat signal shows up at the very end of the show, it's like, yes, justice is going to come for you one day, buddy.
Yep. And it was I was watching it week to week for most of the time, but the last two episodes I watched back to back. And so I saw that full aftermath of when they go back to his childhood, which, by the way, great child actor there. They could have done better casting there. That also kind of looks like this version of the Penguin, and great performance. But to see this kid at 12 years old or whatever, just because he wanted the love of his mother for himself, he locks his brothers in, what was it, like a sewer or something, during a thunderstorm, and lets them drown, and just nonchalantly goes back to his apartment with his mother and watches TV. And I was just like, oh, this is repulsive, and yet I'm still watching, and I'm like, and like you said, it's like, oh, you are so much wanting vindication here, and you want him to get justice, and he will. But that was just so fascinating that you can have such a despicable character and be so fascinated having the show from his perspective. But you mentioned, I mentioned Sophia, obviously a standout of the show. Along with her, who are some of your favorite characters in the show?
Oh, she'd definitely be up there. This, because the whole year one kind of segment, I have read them forever ago, so I don't remember everything that happens in them and some of the sequels. And it's supposed to be canon to Batman's origin story, but there's also 80 plus years of continuity. So they all run together. What's canon right now is whoever the author says at the moment, as much as I hate that. Right. But that's where we're at. So she is kind of in the comics, the hangman kind of figure. So they twist your expectations if you actually read it as no, she actually isn't. And it's her dad who is responsible for murdering all these women, including her own mother. And she finds out, and before she can actually bring him to justice, he pins it all on her. And she gets sent to Arkham, and of course, it's the greatest place on earth. Everyone wants to visit Arkham. No, she is put under immense mental torture and messed with by a doctor there. She also has a very weird sexual relationship with as the series goes on, which is fascinating in its own right. And then just seeing her grow from nothing. It was like she comes out of Arkham at the very beginning of the series. Everyone in the family thinks she's some loon because, well, they know exactly she didn't do it, but she was in Arkham, so that's bad for her. And then she rises her way to the top and murders her entire family, minus two figures, and then murders the other guy after the fact when he questions her. offered a moment of like, man, she's a very serious threat against Penguin. Could have been a great threat against Batman, but he's Oz is able to just deal with her here. Now, I think it's done effectively. It's not done in a way to like make her like some what's the word I'm looking for here? Just some shrill woman who just can't plan things or anything like that. She's not incompetent. Like, no, she's very competent. The fact is, they're both competent, and it's done through effective writing to make me not think of, well, one is just weaker than the other. No, one just got outplayed, and she got outplayed.
It was so brilliant, and I just love though, and like because it was episode 4 when they did that focus on her origin and everything, and like the dichotomy between her and Penguin is fascinating. Also, the parallels between her and Catwoman, who is as her sister, and like I love that connection at the end of the series. But yeah, no, I'm really excited to see. She's going to be in the Batman too. And to see her story continue, but it was just so fascinating too. The show is mainly from Oz's perspective, but you're rooting for her a lot, because like, and I do love that twist of like, yeah, because specifically in the Long Halloween comic, when it's kind of unclear who the holiday killer is, and there's still some level of ambiguity there by the end of the story, and it keeps guessing. I think like the animated movie adaptation they did a few years ago gave a more definitive answer there, but she's a big player there. But I really liked, like you said, the twist here that it's actually Carmine Falcone is the hangman, and then she's been blamed for it, and now she has this vendetta. She takes over. She's a powerful, dynamic leader here, and is the perfect, counter to Oz, who thinks he, can just take over the entire mob empire. And so I love that rivalry. You also get Clancy Brown in here as why am I drawing a blank on his name? Salvatore Maroni.
Sal.
Which was great. I love Clancy Brown. And then probably my other favorite character was Vic. I love, oh my gosh, like I actually did kind of like drop my mouth when Penguin killed him at the end, because I was honestly expecting, because of the parallels between his story and Jason Todd, I was wondering, and also like in the first Batman movie, they teased like that kid of the mayor as like kind of like alluding that he would become Robin too, but like especially because this universe does its own thing and they were doing that, I was just kind of thinking like, oh, maybe this guy will become the Jason Todd Robin in this universe, and this is it would be a really cool origin for him to be initially paired with the Penguin, but then go off and then become like, that'd be kind of cool. And then, he just snaps his neck at the end, and I'm like, that is brutal. But I really did love that character, and I love the actor's performance, and how you have it very much played on the events of the Batman really well, because it tied in the whole flood, and this is a guy who's comes from a low economic status, and he's very much affected by the flood, and the Penguin gives him an opportunity to kind of rise up and make something of himself. But again, I was thinking it would be good, like that as the origin, and then he would, turn to become more of a hero by the end. But no, that poor dude. So that was brutal.
Now, I really loved how they played it too, because their parallels to Jason Todd aren't that far off in the sense that, hey, he tried to like mess with the Penguin. Jason Todd tried to mess with Batman, and kind of got brought in as a result of doing that. And I can't remember exactly when I figured out he wouldn't make it, but I want to say a couple episodes in, I said he's going to kill him at the end, because it's going to be one of those. He can't just like have someone he loves or cares for, like, and it's going to be Vic, and it's going to hurt, and it hurt. Even knowing it was coming, it hurt, because there's a hope there of like, yeah, you're raising up someone who's lost everything, and yeah, he's doing criminal activity, so there's that to mess with. But for the purposes of the relationship between them, Oz being like a father figure to him again, and showing him the ropes and everything, and then Vic giving up his family and friends to be his number one guy, and for that to mean nothing in the end, because Penguin just can't have that. He can't have any attachments anymore, especially with what happened to his mother. And oh gosh, talk about twisted. his final setup.
It was so brutal. And well, Chris, I want to bring up that question too of like, we talked about this, how much Oz is a monster, and and I get great performances all around here. I just have to say, like Colin Farrell, Kristen Milioti is fantastic. But like we said, this is such a character that you have no sympathy for the end. You want to see him come crashing down in the next Batman movie, or however long it takes for Batman to deliver justice here. But why are we? What draws us to stories where the characters are so morally bankrupt, particularly at the center?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for this specifically, it's because sometimes I just like there to be a bad guy in a show.
Yeah.
I don't always need there in direct contradiction to something that's going to be covered later on in the show, where we have a more villain protagonist becoming the main character in Wicked. This is what I want most of the time. I want a villain protagonist who is evil, who may have like pet the dog moments like he does with Vic and his mom and other things like that. But like at the end of the day, like he's also going to kick the dog because he is just black and white, as black as can be, evil, and is going to do things. Yeah. But also at the end of the day, it makes sense for his character to do what he does. He sought the attention of his mother, so he murdered his two brothers by proxy.
Yeah.
He didn't do it himself, but he let it happen.
Yeah.
He wants his mother to only look at him and get the best life for herself. Well, she wants to die, but he doesn't let her do it in the right way and forces her to live where she's not able to actually bask in a glory that he actually wanted it to. His mistreatment of the people around him is just flawless. Like he plays everyone like a fiddle. He's such a great liar, and it's good to see that as a character, because those people exist in the world, and sometimes it's just nice to see, okay, that's how they succeed, so this is what I need to be looking out for. And at the end of the day, also as well, like it doesn't happen in the series, but that's why they flashed the bat signal at the end, like I mentioned earlier, like justice is coming. So I like that we go over here. There's no hopelessness left at the end, because there is that literal beacon of light that something is going to happen to overturn what he's done.
And I also think it plays into the context of the world that the story takes place in. So like we'll get to Wicked later. I have a lot to say about that. And like why I think it's justified to look at one's villain in a different light there. But in a crime epic where there's noir, and there is you don't want to have like someone who is a mobster and who is preying on innocence to somehow get kind of a like, oh well, he was actually doing it for the right reasons, blah blah blah. It's like no, he's a monster. Like we can and it provides more vindication for the hero, for the story as a whole. Like it just works better here. So I agree. I think there are times where it's appropriate, or when looking at someone who is depicted as a villain in a different light and trying to see their perspective. But in other times, it's like, you do want the hero to have a bad guy, and that's okay. You don't have this guy is clearly a monster. It's still a pretty fascinating story to watch. And again, it fits in well with the overall universe, and it sets up the Batman 2 really well. And I can't wait for that. I think it works much better for someone like Oz Cobb. Does not need to be, saying like, oh, well, it was actually, all his actions were justified, and he's actually the hero of his, he's still in his mind the hero of his story. I think that's what every villain will have. That's the key to every great villain, is like, no matter how evil they are, in their mind, yes, they are like, he's justified. But we know as the audience that no, this is pure evil, and it just works here. So
Absolutely.
So overall, yes, Penguin, great series. I am very excited for the Matt Reeves Batman verse to continue. I guess there's one more question: if you could pick another villain that's already shown up here in this universe, or that hasn't, to get their own series or spinoff, who would it be?
That's a good question. You can't go wrong with someone like Mr. Freeze.
Yeah.
Seeing him grow. But probably one who could carry a series more. Ra's al Ghul.
Ra's al Ghul would be amazing.
I want to see that. Because that'd be the only way Vic could come back is with the Lazarus Pit.
Sure.
But right now, just to see like his rise to power, like and his like well-intentioned extremist ideas of like remaking the world and like removing evil from the world by doing evil, which is kind of his whole shtick. I'd love to see something like that. How about you?
Ra's al Ghul would be awesome. I think Poison Ivy could carry her own series too. If they
Yes.
did a version here, and that you could tie. I mean, there's multiple ways they could do it, but I mean, especially playing into her as an environmentalist and wanting to take down, like, I mean, because that one might be a little more of a like, I wouldn't see her as a monster. It would be more complex and like, you know, kind of like maybe anti-hero or a villain, but like I think in this universe that would be really cool to see. So give it to Karen Gillan, let her, you know, like that would be awesome. But yeah,
That's not a bad pick for casting.
Yeah. She's thrown her name out. I can't pull it up right now, but I met her at GalaxyCon like last year, so I've got a picture up on my closet here, above on the wall here. But I'll put that in the chat later. But yeah, so Penguin, excellent series. And our next topic here, are you not entertained? The long-awaited sequel to the 2000 epic. So Christian, first I'll start off. What's your background with the original Gladiator movie?
I didn't watch it when it first came out. It was kind of one of those things. I was too young, and I also was a good child who listened to my parents and didn't like seek it out at that point in time. And then later on, I think in college, I actually saw it for the first time, and I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah." I'm glad I didn't watch it when I was that age when it first came out. But right now, this is perfectly fine, and I love what's happening on screen.
Similar, like, I mean, I couldn't watch it back then when I was like 7, but I think it was still one of the early R-rated movies I saw, because like my dad and I loved the big historical epics like this, so this and Braveheart and Troy and all that. Like, you know, obviously big violence and everything, but like it's one of the Gladiator in particular is one of my dad and I's favorite movies, so I got to see the sequel with him. We had a really good time with it, but yeah, it's just one of those quintessential early 2000s and late 90s historical epics that, you know, it's just so rewatchable. Great score, great cast. Like, and even for I think the most fascinating thing about the original movie is for a movie that went into production with like not even close to a finished script and went through multiple changes, and it is a fascinating story of how it got made, that it's as good as it is. Even though it has some really corny dialogue, and you know the writing itself is not the best, but it's so rewatchable and so bolstered by great performances, great cinematography, great execution. So it still holds up all these years later. So with that in mind, yeah, Gladiator 2 is here now in almost like over 20 years later. Obviously Russell Crowe does not return for it since he died in the original, but I only say that because there were drafts of Gladiator 2 where one of them was actually going to be this like afterlife kind of like really out there epic where Maximus goes through different timelines and ends up winding up in the present. Yeah. It's wild. So there are some like I'm glad that one didn't get made, but I also kind of want to visit an alternate universe where it did, just so I can see what it looks like. But it would have been ludicrous, but I probably would have watched it. But instead, we've got Gladiator 2 with Paul Mescal, Denzel Washington, Pedro Pascal, a huge cast here. So, Christian, what were your overall thoughts on the new movie?
Overall, I did enjoy my experience with it. It's never going to be reaching like my top, I don't know, let me throw out an arbitrary number, 500 films list of all time or anything like that.
Yeah,
but like, I was sitting there on screen and I'm thinking, if you turn your brain off, if you don't look for the historical inaccuracies, of which the first film had many too, this continues to trend, then just accept what's happening on screen. You're in the clear. If you're looking at a more critical lens, like I tend to do, well, you're going to have a bad time. So just, I'm not saying you don't have a critical lens at all, but I'm saying for the sake of this film, for what it's presenting, if I do that, I have a better time with this film. And I did. After I was like, okay, nope, that didn't happen. That's not who that person is in real life. It's like, no, just shut up, Christian. Just enjoy what's happening on the screen.
It has been glorious, though, the amount of articles that have come out since, like, taught in response to the sharks in the Coliseum scene. In
Oh
analyzing the history of that, it's been fascinating looking at that, because like looking at the like actual animals and like and kind of stage fights that were historical, I've been really interested in learning about that. So that like so that's one of the things, like as ludicrous as it is in the movie, and no, there were probably not sharks in the Coliseum, there were other animals and stuff that they did, and it's been really fascinating looking at
there
that.
were naval battles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was interesting. I also my thoughts coming out of it were, okay, anyone who says that they're too good for superhero movies but can watch this and say like this is great, I'm like, okay, come on, man. Like like this movie, I mean, I enjoyed it too, but like this is just as much of a turn your brain off, if not more, than a lot of comic book movies, because this one, literally, I mean, let's just look at the basic narrative. Okay, the son of the emperor in the first movie, who is the villain, is now like was sent away by his mother, goes to an African nation, becomes a warrior there. His family is killed in battle by a Roman general who coincidentally is having an affair with his mother. He is then taken as a slave, taken back to Rome, becomes a gladiator, and then rises up against the empire. And the wrangler that recruited him also wants to take the empire for himself, and then they clash at the end. That is the most comic book plot out there. I mean, I enjoyed it, but you cannot tell me that like superhero movies have no place in the universe and that, you know, these are any different, because I'm sorry, but this is not high art cinema. This is a glorious summer blockbuster, winter blockbuster, you know? So yeah. But yeah, I mean, it has all the tenets of the original. It doesn't really try to distinguish itself much from it. I thought Paul Mescal did a very good job. It's very entertaining overall. It doesn't have the same effect as the first one. Maybe it's just because, like, in that, well, I think the main difference here is like Paul Mescal was good, but when you're standing next to Denzel Washington, there's no chance. Like, Denzel has the most charismatic screen presence by far. So it's similar to where like Russell Crowe carried the movie in the original. In this one, every time Denzel is not on screen, you're like, can we go back to this guy? I want to find out what he's doing, because it's just like, and you could tell he was having the time of his life too. And I also think it would have been more interesting. Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I think it would have been more interesting too if they had done the movie from his character's perspective, because instead, like, again, because Paul Mescal's character Lucius mirrors Maximus so much that it was just like kind of indistinguishable. Is again, slave becomes a gladiator, or former warrior becomes a slave, becomes a gladiator, becomes the hero at the end and unites the people. It's like the same thing, other than he doesn't die at the end, but that's about it. But like with Denzel as this kind of Shakespearean Machiavellian, you know, wanting to manipulate everyone and plays chess, and especially when he's dealing with like Beavis and Butthead as the Roman emperors, and he wants to take it from them. You know, that was just a more fascinating story, and I was more interested in that. So that would have been a more interesting angle. It still was a fun time, but I think Denzel was by far the highlight of the movie. Anything else is still good, but subpar in comparison.
Yeah. We've got some solid action scenes in this movie.
Yeah.
We've got the very beginning of the film is great. Even it's almost comical the way he accidentally murders his own wife at that point in time. But there's also like, there's still something to be felt there. It's like, oh, he has actually lost the love of his life at the same time. It's a weird amalgamation of feelings there. But as time goes on, of course, Denzel steals everything, every scene that he's in as Macrinus. He is perfect. Like, yeah, forget about the historical inaccuracies about his character, about his ethnicity, whatever. Like, he is working in this film, in this like dream of a film, perfectly. And I love him in this film so much because he is cool and cold and calculating, and he gets what he deserves at the end.
I was just reminded of this like first scene with him in Training Day, when Ethan Hawke goes to meet him in the coffee shop, and it's his first day on the job as a cop, and he starts talking, and Denzel just looks at him and he's like, you see this newspaper, 98% of it is garbage, but it entertains me. And here you are trying to distract me from that. And he just like blows up in his face and delivers and like scares the crap out of it. And that's how I felt here, where it's just like he comes on and just smashes like with his screen presence, as he's been doing for decades now. So it was just a delight to have him here. But yeah, as far as I would consider this one of the probably most unnecessary sequels that I can think of that was quite entertaining. I mean, did we need a Gladiator sequel? No. Was it? Did I have a good time? And my dad and I had a good time with it? Yes, absolutely.
Yes, I heartily agree.
Yeah. So, but at the same time, for a movie that is just, pretty much pure popcorn entertainment, and like you said, like, do not go anywhere near this for historical accuracy or anything like that. But nonetheless, I think there are still themes we can glean from movies like this and other historical epics, particularly in the 90s and 2000s. And, one of the most iconic lines that they were from the first movie that they really harp on in this one, repeating several times throughout, is the whole "what we do in life echoes in eternity." And it also, like in Troy, the opening line is "men are haunted by the vastness of eternity." So with those, it's cheesy, but it also fits well into this narrative. But with that in mind, how do you think historical epics like this convey themes of legacy and honor?
Because we're still talking about them today. I mean, as dumb as a film 300 is, we're still talking about the 300 Spartans plus the 1,000 plus Greeks they had with them, who were facing off against an impossible army to beat. We go here and we see there were actual gladiators who fought over hundreds of years in Rome, and these actual emperors existed. Is the story in the film accurate? Absolutely not. But you can then go and then research it yourself. That's fine. And the idea of legacy is super important here because, well, history often is written by the victors. Sometimes, very rarely, it's written by the losers. But for the most part, you get a sense of what was going on here, what was their priority at this point in time. How did they view themselves in light of what was going on? And then we look at them now and say, okay, well, I can't really jive with that, but I like what they're doing here. That's part of the story of our history. Is like human beings are just fascinating people who aren't perfectly 100% black and white. There are things about them that are good, and there are things about them that are bad, because there's not a single perfect person on this world, though there was, and then we murdered him. And then he came back. It's fine. So to see legacy brought up here makes perfect sense. And of course, in the film itself, it's he is actually Maximus's son through the dalliances done there, which also, once again, turn your brain off for history, just accept what's happening on screen. It makes sense. It's fitting for him to be in the Colosseum again, for him to be a gladiator, for him to be fighting and resisting against the power in charge right now. I am perfectly fine with that, because we can look at those things and go, okay, here's where I came from. Here, my dad was raised this way. My mom was raised this way. Here's how that helped them make me into who I am. But then how am I going to carry that on? If I have a family one day, or for the people that are just around me, how am I affected by that? If we don't have that honest self-assessment of ourselves, and I think I've been on 15 different tangents in this one conversation alone, we lose a lot. So we just be thinking about that. What made me what I am? And films like this help us think about that.
No, I think so too. And it's just I don't know, a lot of times we need stories like this where you're talking about villains that earlier that are just so despicable, but we need heroes like Maximus and Lucius that are honorable, and in the face of overwhelming despair, they rouse the people to stand up to injustice. And and I think too, when you look at both of these movies and you look at the emperors, obviously Commodus and then the two emperors here are despicable, power-hungry villains. But then you look at also, there's that speech, a scene between Marcus Aurelius and Maximus in the first movie, where he says to Maximus, how will I be remembered? The great emperor, the tyrant. Because while Marcus Aurelius, as he's portrayed there, was much more calm and a better leader, he was still one who spent his life conquering nations and spilling blood and and expanding the empire. And like even with maybe his intentions were more noble, he still has that element of tyranny to him, and so it challenges your perception there. So yeah, I think all these themes are relevant all these years later, centuries later, thousands of years.
Yes.
And I think that's why we look to these historical epics, like whether they're accurate or not, they just have those elements of heroism and honor and valor that are so timeless and that are still relevant to this day.
Yeah, I think it's important too. I brought up 300 earlier, and a lot of what we get there, well, some of what we get there, is from someone like Herodotus, who is known as the father of history, but also known as the father of lies, because if it sounded cool, he put it in there. And we historians have had to look at him and go, okay, what was actually happening there? And the same thing happens with every single curator of Roman history as they were going on. Well, who was paying them off? Who was the emperor before? Like, why are they writing these things about him? Is it because Caligula actually did the things he did, or is it because it's more scandalous to say he did? We want to hate him right now with the current establishment. What's going on there? And I think that's an important thing that films like this can teach us is, yes, inaccuracies all over the place, but let's actually pour into the motivations behind what history we do have that is written by the people there and see what they have to say. What was it about their what was going on in their spheres of influence where culturally this was appropriate and this wasn't, that then they didn't judge a past emperor or what have you for what they did. Just look at presidents across America, same thing. It's like, what was acceptable then? Well, it was acceptable for Thomas Jefferson to have slaves back in the day. And he wasn't, there were people who did criticize him for it, but at the end of the day, it wasn't like mainly what they were going for. I had something else I was going to say, but I'm sorry. My aging mind is.
No, I think you said it really well there. It's like even in a big popcorn action blockbuster, you can have these themes that still resonate with us today. And I think that's why we turn to movies like this. And like I mentioned Troy earlier too, like it's a lot of that movie is about, should Achilles go fight in Troy, knowing that he will die, but do it for eternal glory. And even then, it's like, okay, he gets a movie made about him, thousands of years later. But at the same time, there's, your story will fade over time. The movie Gangs of New York talks about that really well too, of like, how there's that scene at the end that's brilliant, with the U2 song playing, and it just shows the graves of the main characters fading over time and the New York evolving. So it just like it's even in these cheesy big epics like this, it's like, okay, are you fighting for yourself and your own glory? Or are you fighting for a higher honor and higher purpose to protect the people around you and fight for freedom? Yeah. I
think I remember what I was going to say.
Go ahead.
I was going to tie it back somehow into the idea of why I will never really condemn movies like this unless there's something horrendously bad about them. If it forces you to ask a question and it forces you to like look it up, I'd call that a win. Like,
I agree.
One of the number one results I've seen in the past couple of weeks is, did the Colosseum actually have naval battles in it? It's like, it's a genuine question you would ask after seeing the film. And yes, they happened multiple times over. They had a special word for it, like Naumachia or something like that.
I read about that earlier. Yeah. It was something like that, though. I read about that. Yeah.
But it forces me, okay, well, why do I believe what I believe about history? Is it because I just took what my history professor said, or is I actually pour into it myself? Like, if it forces you to go there, and as someone, we both deal with the Bible in very different ways. It's like, hey, like it forces me to go to there and say, do I trust what is being said in this book?
Right.
Were there redactors in there? Were there editors in there? Or do we have what was the original word? Well, you'll find 15 different answers across Christendom, but like it forces me to go in there and like, do I believe what is set in here or not? And same thing with any history book. If this is what's being said about George Washington, or this is what's being said about Samson, whatever, like, why do I believe that this is true? Is it because it's true or because I want it to be true?
That's a great point. I mean, I think any curiosity that stems from historical epics like this is a great thing. It's not that it has to be. I think when you're making a movie like this, your goal is to make a good movie and tell a good story. And then and you're drawing on elements of history and elements of time, but you can do your own thing to make it a good movie, and that's totally fine. But yeah, I mean, there's a really good podcast called Our Fake History that often analyzes movies and stuff like that. Like, there's a great series on Braveheart on that. So it's it's a thing. Pop culture is a great way to kind of get conversations going, and then you can go and look at the broader picture and dive deep into the actual history, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, you guys can't go wrong by checking that out. He does great work.
Show. Really great show. Absolutely. Sweet. Well, any other thoughts on Gladiator 2?
No, other than I did enjoy my time with it. There's nothing else I can say that I haven't said already.
No, I think that both Ridley Scott and the whole cast were having a great time, and it showed. So, yeah. Very cool. Okay, well, the next topic I am very excited about. Christian, I do not know your background with Wicked and Wizard of Oz. I'm going to ask you that in a sec, but just as a note here. Okay, so first off, I had a Wizard of Oz playset when I was a kid. I saw Wicked on Broadway in 2012. Was already listening to the soundtrack religiously before that. But that was one of my first Broadway shows. I was mesmerized. A longtime fan of just the whole universe. I've got a book on the making of the musical, which I saw now is resurfaced at Barnes & Noble. I was like, I've had that for over a decade. So that was cool. And then I saw Wicked again last year when it came to Durham at DPAC. And then my sister-in-law and I went to that, and we saw the movie again for the first time. I've already seen the movie twice, and I'm going to go again. So if you cannot tell already, I am a super fan both of this universe and of Wicked as a whole. And I've written about it before too, because I'll get to that in a little bit too about the disability representation. But I love this musical, so I could not wait for the movie, and I'll give my full thoughts on it. But suffice to say, I loved it. So what is your background though, Christian, with just Wizard of Oz in general, the Wicked? Have you ever gotten to see the show before the movie?
Yeah, Wizard of Oz, I watched that at a very young age with my family. I mean, to this day, my mother is terrified of the flying monkeys. So whenever that scene shows up, she won't look at the movie, which I get. But I love that film. I read the books, the first book. I have not read any of the sequels.
Yeah.
A couple years ago, enjoyed that. There's obvious differences between book and film. That always happens. Now, Wicked itself, I haven't watched this movie. I have not seen the play, but I did. There was a girl I knew in college I had a thing for, who had a thing for this. And I have negative associations with this movie because of how she treated me. So I wanted nothing to do with it for quite some time.
That sounds like a villain origin right there.
But the general idea of the movie, I understood as Elphaba is showing her origins and how she could become the Wicked Witch of the West, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that general idea, I mean, I guess it depends on how you do it. It's not really my thing. I prefer, once again, my villains to be villains. Not saying there can't be any nuance to them at all. But I don't care about Cruella and Maleficent, like we mentioned earlier. And I'm sure there's something else I can think of.
Yeah.
There's been a lot.
They're gonna do it with Scar in the Mufasa movie. I can tell already. God. So yeah. Disney loves to do that. So yeah. I see that. That's a valid. Because I get like you were talking about earlier. You want villains to be villains. I totally get that. I think in here, I would go see the movie because it's wonderful. Especially if you get to see the musical at some point, if you can get over your feelings with that person and your history there. But I just think this is one of the better ones that does it because, well, for one, in the original Wizard of Oz, the wizard is already sort of a villain. He's revealed to be a fraud. There's already that element of okay, there probably is more to this story than what we're getting here. So I think for it's a story that, it makes total sense why you're going to tackle this. But yeah, this takes you back to Elphaba and Glinda, the Wicked Witch of the West, and then the Good Witch from the original. They were students together at Shiz University, which has a lot of parallels to Hogwarts. And the first part, like, so the movie, this part tells the first part of the musical. Part two comes out next year. And so this movie is very much about Elphaba's origin and how does she go from this outsider who is shunned by everyone, prejudiced because she looks different. She has green skin, and she's this like total outcast, while Glinda is Miss Popular. And there is a song that, like, have you gotten to listen to any of the soundtrack?
I've definitely heard some songs. I could never name any of them, but they
Okay, gotcha, yeah.
I'm just not I'm not a musical person by nature. Like Disney would be like the main exception of that,
right.
In animated form. But like, musicals aren't really my thing.
I gotcha. Yeah. I'm a theater kid, so of course I totally fall into the stereotype of like, you can see the like TikToks and stuff right now of like theater kid. I did not sing during the show because I'm respectful, and I'm like, I do not like the people that are like pulling out their phones and stuff like that. I'm like, it's still a movie. Like, I was lip syncing to a lot of the songs during the movie because like I know them by heart so well. But I'm like, I'm going to give respect here. And also, I don't want people to have to listen to me singing when they can hear Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande singing, because obviously they are infinitely better than anything I could muster. But I really think, though, even with what you said there about wanting the villains to be villains and everything, I think this is a story you'd be more interested in because it does add so much nuance and really changes your perspective. So that's why the question I asked at the beginning of this episode of like, why or what can we learn from seeing iconic stories from different perspectives? This is a prime example because it's not doing it for just the heck of it of like, oh, what if? I think in the when you look at the original novel by Gregory Maguire that inspired the musical, a lot of it was in response to the Wizard of Oz of like, he's thinking there's so much more there, and there's got to be so much more than just like a one-sided narrative of like a good witch, a bad witch, and there's got to be more to this, and especially when we learn that the wizard himself is kind of a fraud, that what made the Wicked Witch of the West who she is. And this story is a wonderful exploration of that. I think one of the best things about the movie is that a lot of movie musicals just have really a hard time translating a stage adaptation, a beloved stage musical, to the screen in an effective way. And this does it wonderfully. John M. Chu is someone who understands cinematic language and how to effectively bring a musical to life on the big screen, and not do it verbatim as you would on stage, but to utilize the medium of cinema and tell a story that way. So he did it within the Heights a few years ago, which was a great movie too. And then with here, I'll just give one example without, this isn't really major spoilers, but you've probably heard the song Defying Gravity, which is the big showstopper in the musical. And it's where this movie ends. And in the stage production, it's such a big moment because you get to see Elphaba fly away. And to see that on stage is breathtaking. But, if you're going to do that for a movie, okay, it's not that hard with modern day effects to make someone fly, right? So how do you capture the same awe and mesmerizing nature that's in the Broadway show, but do it here in movie form? And what they do here is, instead of her just immediately flying, she's in the middle of this big action sequence where her and Glinda are being chased by the wizard's guards, and they're going throughout the castle. And when she flies, initially she falls first, almost to the ground, because this is her first time flying. She's just coming into, this stage of her journey and her powers. She falls first, and then she sees an image of her younger self and her whole life playing out. And then she rises back up and flies. And it's a brilliant moment because it's both, this huge sweeping cinematic moment. It adds another layer to the story and to her character depth. And again, it just really utilizes what you can do in film versus what you can do on stage, while still capturing that same awe, that same wow moment. So I really loved what they did here because again, there have been other movie musicals where it's just like, okay, all you're doing is just trying to do the same thing on the stage, and you can't. You have to make it, why is this a movie? And John M. Chu understands that, and he does a sweeping, amazing production here. The effects are astounding. The production design, the editing, the music, the performances. It is. I just could gush and gush about this movie. I'm trying to be objective here, but you can tell this is an 11 out of 10. My favorite movie of the year. So yeah, it's just brilliant.
But it sounds like great direction, though, because when you transition from theater to film, obviously you're going to have a bigger budget. You're going to be able to do things that you're not able to perform on a theatrical, stage. So that sounds like you did a really great job, as opposed to trying to think of one of the last musicals I saw. And it probably isn't, but like the Les Mis movie that came out a couple of years ago. I had read the story first, and then the movie was fine, but I don't think it was a good adaptation of a theatrical production brought to film, comparatively speaking. This sounds way better than that.
100%. And I since you brought it up, I have a very negative view of that movie specifically. Because that one is a prime example of I don't think it utilizes the medium of film at all, because that movie is 3 hours of close-ups on the actors' faces because he was trying to emphasize the performances. I'm no, when you're doing a movie and when you have production design and you have the sets and everything, you need to play with camera angles and you need to give your audience a justification for why this is a movie, and I don't think that movie does it well at all. Of course, Hugh Jackman and Anne Hathaway are great, but that does, that's a prime example of a bad, adaptation of going from, because I've seen the stage musical and it's wonderful, going from a stage version to screen that's not done in an effective way. Whereas here, John M. Chu's direction is just astounding. So it's a spectacle. It's beautiful. And there's another scene where one of my other favorite songs is Dancing Through Life, which is another big transition moment, where Fiyero, the popular kid, comes to the school, invites everyone to a party, and it's about, the song itself is only about 6 or 7 minutes, on the soundtrack and on stage. They expand it into a 20-minute sequence here because it starts off in the library at Chiz, then it transitions to them going on a boat ride to the ballroom, and then the ballroom sequence, and then it's paced out because it's a big transitional moment where Elphaba and Glinda become friends, and they really took the time to showcase that, and her and Glinda giving Elphaba her famous hat and everything. There's just a lot it does from a visual standpoint that is fascinating, and works so well for the movie. So I really love that scene as well. But yeah, I'm trying to give enough here to convince you to go rush to see it without completely spoiling it. But
I don't care about spoilers. Because this is obviously part 1 of 2. Now, it is my understanding, and we did mention spoilers earlier, that the events of The Wizard of Oz take place in what would be a part 2.
Yeah, so it whereas this movie a lot again is about how Elphaba and Glinda meet, and then Elphaba kind of finding her path at the very end. Yeah, the events of the second half tie in directly to Wizard of Oz. There is still some stuff that happens before that, but without spoiling who becomes who, you get to see who becomes the Scarecrow, who becomes the Tin Man, the Wicked Witch of the East, all of their origins, and then it builds up directly to the events of Wizard of Oz, and also, this the Wicked opens with the death of the Wicked Witch of the West. So, and the movie opens with the image of the water after it's poured on and she's melted, and then it goes to Glinda telling everyone in Oz that the witch is dead, and that and that ties it in because then one of the residents asks, "Wait, did you know her?" And Glinda goes back and tells the story. So yes, part 2 goes back and ties it directly. The what?
It's a nice framing device.
It is. Yeah. No, it's like I said, I think because that's the bad thing about Wicked. It's it's prequel, but it also again, without spoiling, but there's a major twist at the very end of the musical that will really change your perception of Wizard of Oz. So that's, I mean, that is the one thing. It's like, if you want to view Wizard of Oz completely as it is on its own, and like the heroes, the villains, and not change anything, then I have to say Wicked will shatter your perception of everything, because you can, like, I remember before I ever saw the musical, my sister saw it first, and she was like recounting the story to me when I was a kid, and she's like, yeah, I can never watch the Wizard of Oz the same way again. And it's cool that it has that effect. It doesn't feel like it's just like this, oh, what if story. It really feels like canon. And it really feels like this wonderful addition to the mythology. But yeah, so yeah, part two, yeah, and it was fun. It's been fun talking with friends, both who are huge fans of the musical and also ones who have never seen it and haven't even listened to the whole soundtrack. They love the movie, but yeah, they don't want any spoilers for part two. And I'm like, okay, I have to like keep my mouth shut for a year here. But yeah, so it's fun. But yeah,
Yeah. Well,
but yeah,
I'm gonna break your heart. I ain't gonna see it, but I am very like. Some things just aren't for me, and that's fine. That means they're for other people.
Yeah,
that means you get to enjoy them,
sure.
and I get to bask in that. Like I like hearing people talk about something they love. So I am a-okay with this conversation. Like, let it out, man. And
it's also like, given how well it's doing the box office, like not to say we don't need your support there, but like enough people have caught on to it that I don't have to worry about. Part two is definitely happening, where it's there are enough people enjoying it that like. That's okay. You don't have to love every property like this. But yes, for me, this is a long time. Like, I've been waiting for the movie for years and was beyond satisfied. So I'm at this point, I'm like, any musical John M. Chu wants to do, just let him have it. I wanted to with the disability representation too. So this is something I've actually written about for work in my column because it's as much as I love the musical. In previous iterations, the one problem I have with it is so Elphaba's sister, who, I mean, this isn't a spoiler because obviously if he knows it, that her sister is the one who becomes the Wicked Witch of the East, because like the one who the house falls on at the beginning of Wizard of Oz, she is a wheelchair user, has always been in the musical, and I've had issues both with them casting non-disabled actors to play her, for one, and then also I don't want to get into the spoilers of what happens in part two with it, but that the specific plot point has always rubbed me the wrong way, and I'm wondering if they'll do it differently in the movie because for one, they actually cast a wheelchair user to play her in the movie, which is a huge step. I mean, that's something, again, they don't do enough in, and it's one of the biggest criticisms of disability representation in Hollywood and in other mediums. So that was really exciting. And there is a plot point in part two that I'm wondering, because I'm not the only one who has voiced that criticism. A lot of people have over the years, and especially since they have a wheelchair user playing her, I'm wondering if they will change that because there are still changes they make to this part for the movie. So I'm hoping they might do something different for that. That's like because that was, again, my one criticism of the musical was that element. And already it's better here. So it was really cool to see an actual wheelchair user player have a prominent role and for the representation to be really good. So that was really cool. But yeah.
Yeah, for Hollywood especially, like, it's inexcusable. If a certain character is a certain race, is a certain gender, has a certain disability, like you have the ability, you have the money, seek them out. As opposed to like a theatrical production, for the most part, where you go ability over performance most times, because not everyone who is able to perform and is going to fit your budget is going to be the person you want for that role, because they may not exist where you're at. But for a Hollywood film, completely and utterly inexcusable. So it's good to hear that they actually put their money where their mouth was and actually put the character as they're supposed to be represented.
It was exciting. So, I forget. I'll have to look up the actor's name, but yeah, she's been getting a lot of acclaim. So that's been really cool. But yeah. So, for viewers, listeners out there, definitely go see Wicked. If you have, I think if you're a fan of the musical, you'll love it. And if you're not, I think you'll really enjoy it. It is just a perfect Hollywood spectacle blockbuster. The musical that we really need right now. So I did love it. All right. Well, Christian, this has been great. Wrapping up here. So do you have any recommendation for the audience to check out, either related to any of the topics from today or just something entirely different?
Okay. Well, this is what's new, so we recommend the things we did today.
Mm-hmm.
Man, which one would I choose? I mean, Penguin. It's gonna be the Penguin.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, I've even seen non-comic book fans like just say that they love that show. So I am all for more people checking it out because I'm ready for Batman Part 2 whenever that releases. Since things take way too long to get done these days. That's its own discussion. For right now, the Penguin satisfies my hunger for that content.
It's currently set for 2026, so hopefully nothing gets interrupted there. We've got Superman before then, so I'm okay waiting. Okay. But I am excited. But my recommendation. So obviously all the things we talked about today, but one thing I want to, if you are a fan of Wicked and Wizard of Oz universe and you want to go further, one book series that I highly recommend is called the Dorothy Must Die series by Danielle Page. It's a book series I discovered during COVID, and I loved it. It's a YA series it's a set also in Kansas. Another girl who, unlike Dorothy, she comes from a very impoverished background, has a neglectful mother. She gets swept away in a tornado and goes to Oz. And when she gets there, Dorothy is now an evil dictator running a kind of dystopian Oz. It sounds ridiculous, but it's a brilliant, really well-told story. That's how I discovered Danielle Page, and I love her work. I follow her on Blue Sky, and she's written a lot of YA books. She's done also some stuff for DC. She did a Mara graphic novel, and I really love her work. So if you're just itching for more Oz stuff, especially in the year between now and Part 2 of Wicked, I really recommend that series. So that's a good one. Dorothy Must Die. There are 4 main books, and there's a bunch of spin-off ones and short stories. So yeah. So
perfect.
Well, this has been great. Let me point out my outline here. Well, for our listeners, viewers out there, we want to thank you for joining us today. If you would be so kind, leave us a 5-star review. You can head to our YouTube, Discord, Patreon, and you can also suggest future episode topics. So we're always looking for new ideas. So join in on the discussions there. We would love to have you, and we're all over social media. We want to thank all of our Patreons too for your support. That helps keep us going. So you are much appreciated. And remember, we are all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.